As ruminants digest feed, the feed energy lost not only through feces and urine, there is another invisible form of energy loss, enteric methane emissions, which lost about 2% to 12% of feed energy. Feces consist primarily of undigested feed components and represent a loss of digestible energy. In contrast, methane is synthesized after the feed has been digested, therefore, within the animal energy system, it is classified as a loss of metabolizable energy. Approximately 90% to 95% of the methane emitted by ruminants originates from rumen fermentation and is released through eructation, while only 5% to 10% comes from hindgut fermentation. Among all livestock, dairy cows have the highest methane emissions. A single adult cow emits about 120 to 150 kilograms of methane per year. That's equivalent to the annual natural gas consumption of 5 Chinese households, enough to power a taxi for 1,800 kilometers. Beyond being a waste of feed energy, methane is a greenhouse gas, and its warming effect is 25 times more powerful than that of carbon dioxide. Greenhouse gas emissions from livestock account for approximately 14.5% of total anthropogenic emissions, with ruminant livestock contributing roughly 73% of that sector. In 2013, dairy products were included in the first EU environmental footprint pilot. In 2021, China's proposal of the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality strategy brought significant attention to ruminant methane emissions. The future implementation of carbon trading and carbon quotas will directly impact dairy production and international trade. Therefore, reducing methane emissions from cattle and sheep not only improves feed energy efficiency but also supports the sustainable development in global cooling. To develop effective mitigation strategies, it is essential to first understand the underlying mechanisms of methane production within the rumen. The rumen is the primary organ for digestion and absorption in ruminant. It serves as an anaerobic fermentation chamber with a constant temperature for microorganisms. Through eating, chewing, and rumination, the animal provides a continuous supply of fermentation substrates for these microbes. Meanwhile, the rumen maintains a stable pH by neutralizing and removing fermentation acids through saliva secretion, absorption via the rumen wall, and the outflow of digesta. Under these optimal fermentation conditions, rumen cellulolytic bacteria and protozoa rapidly decompose the diet, producing a large amount of hydrogen, which is primarily utilized by methanogens to produce methane. For more than half a century, scientists have been searching for ways to lower the carbon footprint of animal products, mostly including management, nutrition, and genetic breeding. First, by combining advanced techniques in breeding, reproduction, nutrition, and healthcare, the milk yields of cows were largely increased, the growth of beef were accelerated. Improving efficiency in this way is a powerful tool for significantly lowering the carbon footprint of animal products. Methane persists in the atmosphere for approximately 10 to 12 years. This implies that if the population of ruminant livestock remains stable compared to 12 years ago, methane production and degradation reach a dynamic equilibrium. Taking dairy cows as an example, over the past decade, China's dairy herd size decreased by 25%, yet national milk production increased by 20%. This is attributed to the rise in average annual milk yield per cow from 5.5 tons to 10 tons. These figures demonstrate that the carbon footprint of milk in China has been reduced by approximately 30% during this period. Secondly, nutritional strategies to reduce methane emissions in cattle and sheep primarily involve 3 approaches: inhibiting methane synthesis pathways, reducing the production of hydrogen, the precursor for methane, and enhancing alternative hydrogen utilization pathways to compete with methanogens for hydrogen. In the rumen, concentrate-based diets favor propionate-type fermentation. Propionate fermentation competes with methanogens for hydrogen, while acetate fermentation provides the hydrogen necessary for methane production. Therefore, increasing the proportion of concentrate in the diet or utilizing feed processing techniques to enhance ruminal propionate fermentation can effectively reduce the methane emission intensity of ruminants. Using artificial neural networks, Professor Yao Jianhu and his team at Northwest ANF University have developed a predictive model for methane emissions and milk yield of dairy cow. They discovered a sweet spot for nutrition. By keeping the starch-to-NDF ratio below 0.63 and fat levels between 2.89% and 4.86%, farmers can lower methane emissions while actually reaching peak milk yield. An ideal methane inhibitor should provide sustained and effective reduction of methane emissions without compromising dietary digestion, animal health, or productive performance. After comparing several methane inhibitors, our team discovered that through reducing the abundance of hydrogen-producing microbes to reduce methane emissions doesn't work in a long run. The effect fades over time because the rumen microorganisms adapt to the change. However, we found a more lasting solution, using biochemical inhibitors or adding hydrogen sinks like 3-NOP and fumaric acid. These substances compete with methane-producing microbes for hydrogen, leading to a long-term and stable reduction in emissions. Even under identical conditions, different cows produce different amounts of methane, with 33% of breeding value. This means we can selectively breed lines of cattle, goats, and sheep that naturally emit less methane, a field where researchers worldwide are now making great strides. In summary, while significant progress has been made in mitigating methane emissions from livestock, there is still an extensive need for development, evaluation, and widespread implementation. It is essential for governments, enterprises, and researchers to join forces to achieve the green and sustainable development of the livestock industry.